Hi, everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and we are in yet another Zoom room. We are switching things up a little bit this week, and we have a new background. And I'm very glad this week to have Beneth Goldschmidt-Sauer as our guest. Beneth is an accomplished award-winning writer. She's a teacher and a poet. She taught for many years at Brattleboro Union High School, and she retired from there in 2019, just right before the pandemic. In her classrooms, Beneth inspired students, creating space for the alchemy that can occur through sharing ideas and questions, dialogue, and discussion. Welcome, Beneth.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. Yes, as I think I told you, you have been mentioned in more than a couple shows, so I figured I should have you on. Yeah, you've made an impression. Yes, and inspired, as I said, inspired students. So you actually grew up, however, in New York City. You were from. Well,
we lived there until I was almost 7, and then we moved to Europe for a while, and then back to the East Coast outside New Haven, and then to Cooperstown, New York, and then here and there. So I've lived a lot of different places, I guess.
Yeah. How has that influenced you? Or do you think it has?
Well, I'm actually, I'm an introvert. And I think that moving so often and, starting a new school in the fall so many times over actually forced me to be a little more outgoing. And I think that it probably had something to do with my choice, of a career as a teacher, because that's the best way not to be an introvert for 8 hours a day, at least, because you have to be up there, keeping things going or trying to, so.
Outside of your family, did you have any strong influences growing up, or things that you obviously have the teachers with your parents, but any other people who led you in directions?
Well, I think I was really lucky to have several sort of monumental teachers in my life. One of them was Bob Horwitz, who is one of my elementary school teachers outside New Haven, who did amazing things with us, like having us write, Isaac Bashevis Singer, a letter telling him what his story, Gimple the Fool, had meant to us. And Mr. Singer wrote us back, and I wish I had the letter. Now, I sadly don't. So, there were some teachers who gave me the time, to sort of become myself. And he was certainly one. And then I had a remarkable high school English teacher, Ruth Ewell, who I'm not even really sure what to say about her. She was so much her own person and did not suffer fools gladly. And I'm, probably guilty of taking on a little bit of that myself. But.
So you traveled a lot, and your dad actually taught at Yale for a while. So there was an academic piece to your family.
He did. He taught at the medical school. He was there for maybe 7 years, I think. So yes, and my mom was a high school teacher also. So I kind of got it from both sides.
And you went to Reed College.
I did.
In Portland.
I did.
That's a long way away from the East Coast. So was that
That was on purpose. Yeah, I mean, the other schools that I applied to were all on the East Coast, I think, and they all, when I visited them, felt pretty familiar to me. And Reed was the only one that I couldn't go see because we didn't have the money to send me out there to visit. And so I thought, I really want something different.
One of the things about Reed is that there's a nature preserve. Is that right? Right in the center of the school?
Well, there's a canyon, right, which is, and so some of the dorms are cross canyon. So you have to go through that area every day if you're living over there, which I
Yeah.
was during some semesters. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Did that affect you, that kind of geography?
Yeah. And I also think that, in Portland, they have daffodils in February,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
you know,
right.
because it's a temperate, such a temperate area. So that was a beautiful change for me, to have the outdoors so accessible and not covered with snow as
Well,
everything is
yes,
here right now.
looking out your window behind you, right now we're all craving some daffodils.
Oh boy, can't come soon enough for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know. At some point, you took a year abroad and went to the Netherlands.
I did a year in high school. I was an exchange student
Uh-huh.
my junior year in high school, and then came back and finished up in Cooperstown, New York. Um,
Quite a change.
it was, yeah. So I went to three different high schools actually in 4 years. So that was also kind of a whirlwind. But
And being in the Netherlands, you were with a family there?
I lived with three different families.
Uh,
Yeah, it was a Rotary exchange student, and so Rotarians took you in, which was wonderful. There was one family that I had sort of a harder time with, but the other two um, were wonderful. And I learned Dutch, and yeah, I've always loved languages, and I've taken a lot of them, but I'm no longer really fluent in anything, including English. So
that comes with retirement, right?
right, yeah, homeschooling a 10-year-old. Yeah,
That's right. Yes, yeah, we'll talk about the homeschooling piece too. But at some point, you decided to go back and get a master's in
I did.
education.
After Reed, I waitressed for a while, which was an experience in Cooperstown, New York, and then I taught in a couple of private schools, and I just thought, you know what, I really want to be. I want to be in a less exclusive environment, I think,
Mm-hmm.
kind of what I was feeling. And so I went back and got my master's, and then took various jobs until finally I landed at BUHS, much to my joy. So
Nice. Yeah, and at that point, and when you went back to get a master's in education, when you graduated, it was in English. Is that right?
right, English
That was your
literature. Right.
bachelor's,
Yeah.
right? And was that what you were focused on teaching?
Yes, although my first teaching job at a private school was at a school for dyslexic boys.
Mm.
And then my second job, I also worked with students with learning disabilities. So that was sort of what I did for, 6 or 7 years before I went back just to do more or less, typical English classroom instruction.
Yeah. And when you were working with kids with learning differences, did that give you skills for going back into a different kind of when you were at BUHS or a public school classroom?
Oh, I think for sure. And I also really appreciated, kids who are dyslexic have a really ingenious kind of way of working around, or ways of working around language.
Right.
And so I also just really relished, some of their humorous things that they would say and do. But for sure, I mean, I learned a lot of techniques then that I had to use later on in, quote unquote, typical classrooms. I mean, there is no typical classroom. So.
Right. And I think that after the pandemic, there will probably be a lot more atypical classrooms.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this affects education. Yeah, I'm not sure what's gonna happen. I mean, watching my son, being at home now pretty much since last March, he really craves his friends. He craves being around other kids. And I think that there's a lot of learning that happens that is, socially based, not just academic. So
right.
The fact that a lot of kids are missing out on those fundamental pieces, it's going to be hard to sort of predict how that's going to play out. But
Yeah, that's where we'll see the new world manifesting
Right.
itself, right?
Right.
One of the many ways, yeah. And so you get to Brattleboro. You're teaching at the high school, and you're doing English. You're teaching English, but you're also teaching mythology.
Right. I think that there were a couple of years probably before I was before that class kind of fell in my lap.
Hmm.
Um, I'm trying to remember, exactly what my first year doing that was, but yes, and then that kind of became something that I took on and embraced and had a huge amount of fun with for many years. I think there were some semesters where I taught 3 sections of mythology, and that was all I did.
Oh wow, that's so interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was fascinating to me to talk with you earlier about the mythology and thinking that I know that when I was growing up, there was a time when I was deep into mythology, and I can't remember if we studied it in school, but it's like I don't know, maybe fifth, sixth grade, something like that. I know Waldorf schools have that as part of their curriculum at a certain age. And my question to you is about because I'm curious about the developmental piece of that. Like, obviously, there's something I can remember just being saturated by reading myths and Edith Hamilton and all of them. And how does that play out coming to the teen years?
Well, I think that they are, to be trite, ageless stories. And I think that, some of my favorite myths are the ones that speak to our everyday, or maybe not every day, but, frequent experiences, like Orpheus and Eurydice. Um, he's in love, and then she dies and she has to go down to the underworld, and then he's going to get her back, no matter what he does. But he messes up and she gets pulled back down. And I think that, loss, and accepting loss
Hmm.
is a really big part of human experience. And, um, and Gilgamesh, which is one of my favorite things to teach. It's about, losing a best friend and wanting, and then coming to terms with your own mortality, and, realizing that instead of yearning for this thing that you can never have, you really need to, seize the day, I guess. I mean, the alewife, Shidori, says to him, you should have a child, or look at a child and enjoy, the child's innocence. Focus on things that are in front of you rather than this unattainable thing.
Hmm.
So I think that, there's also a lot of, gore, and there's certainly a fair amount of repugnant sex. And so all of those, all of those things appeal, to all of us. But I think that, some parts of the myths definitely appeal to high schoolers more than other parts. And I definitely played those up. So
Right. Yes.
had a
Yes.
captive audience. So
Yeah. But they enjoyed it. You did have a captive audience that was really interested in all of the things that you were bringing up. I think that we are still compelled by the myths that we grew up with. Um, and in saying that, I realized, oh my, we had many myths that we grew up with that were not necessarily Greek or Roman, right, or from other cultures within our own family, etc.
one of the things that I tried to do in teaching mythology was to get them to make that leap. And so when we read the Maori, or Maori, depending on how you want to pronounce it, creation myths, Mama, Papa, and Father Rangi are separated by their children because their children can't bear, to be excluded from their parents' relationship. And then as the story unfolds, each parent has sort of a favorite offspring. And so there's so many ways that you can talk about mythology that apply directly to people's family constellations.
Yes.
And, so I tried to make those parallels, throughout. And I think that the kids got it a lot. And the thing that they particularly liked about the creation myth I was just talking about is that there's a sweet potato god, so
Great.
So there's so much fun, it's just, there's a lot of fun, even if it's very serious at the same time. So,
Yeah, that's certainly true in Native American
mhm.
stories. There or where the jester comes in, or the
The
fool,
coyote, right?
and for
Yeah.
America, yeah, for Native Americans, yes, the coyote, or yeah. So yeah, it's nice to have a goofy
Hmm.
character in there.
Some of the discussions that I had in mythology with students were among the most challenging and provocative
Hmm.
and intellectual discussions that I think that I've ever had with students. We read the story of Abraham and Isaac and talked quite a bit about it, the Old Testament story, and then we watched a movie called The Believer, which is about a young formerly Jewish man who becomes a neo-Nazi. And the story of Abraham and Isaac is sort of woven throughout the film. And it's about submission to God, and it's about standing up for yourself and all kinds of things. But at any rate, at the end of the semester, if we had time, I would give them the assignment of leading the class, and I would sit in the back of the room, and they would discuss sort of the juxtaposition of Abraham and Isaac and this really, quite terrifying movie, but a beautiful movie. And it was remarkable. I mean, I think that, what it always made me think about is they don't really need a teacher.
Hmm.
There just needs to be somebody maybe to point the way, or maybe just to get out of the way. I never fully decided what it was, but so those final moments, in that class just showed me how much they had learned.
Yeah.
And a lot of it without any, any quote unquote teaching on my part. So that was just fabulous. And I'll never forget those moments. I just love teenagers. And there was a kind of a silly editorial or opinion piece in the Guardian, maybe this morning even, about, learning from teenagers and how brilliant they are. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's just, that's why I did that job. Really, I could never have been an elementary school teacher. I would have, torn out what little hair I have. I needed that. I needed to be met, at that level and pushed, because they
Right.
definitely pushed my level too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Because the questions they're asking are so fundamental sometimes in some way. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And I don't have answers. I mean, I think that's the thing is, and I think I conceded that pretty frequently. I don't have the answers. I have suggestions,
Hmm.
but maybe myths have answers.
What about the whole superhero thing that's happened? I think that obviously it probably started with Superman back in the 50s, but
Mhm.
it's grown and grown and grown. Do you see a correlation between that and myth?
I think that it's a little different because, as some mythologists would say, um, mythology pushes us into the spiritual realm, and I
Mm.
don't. I don't think of Superman that way. Although, when we watched this sort of delightfully terrible animated version of the Ramayana, the Monkey King, Hanuman, flies just like Superman. So that was always a fun moment because the kids
Mm-hmm.
laugh at that. But I think that mythology is it's a little different realm. I'm not totally sure how to express it, but
Can you talk a little bit about that? What transpires for you and for that grouping of people when you're teaching?
yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I mean, I'm sure that if I scrolled through, the countless recommendations that I wrote for students, um, that I wrote about specific examples there. But I think the larger idea is that the teacher is one ingredient, and the various kids are other ingredients, and together, you make something that can be gold. I mean,
Mm.
um, it's just, teaching is like nothing else. I mean, I love to write, and I sit at home and I write, but that's just me, myself. It's not sort of a communal effort.
Right.
Yeah. So I wish I could come up with a perfect example. I mean, I'm sure that, there were moments when I taught Beloved or when I taught Invisible Man in AP,
Mm-hmm.
that we had those moments that just sort of riveted us.
Yes.
But I have pandemic brain, so
You're not alone.
yeah.
And that also brings us to another question, which is, I find it so interesting that what you're teaching, some of your curriculum or your syllabus has to do with books that I read in school, Fitzgerald and Hemingway and To Kill a Mockingbird and Salinger. And again, are we dealing with myth? Are we dealing with timeless stories that kids are still learning from? Is that it?
Well, it's interesting because I think that to a certain degree, I inflicted some of those books on kids.
Hmm.
I mean, I think that Gatsby is aesthetic bliss for me. I don't think that there are finer sentences that I've stumbled across anywhere in the English language.
Yeah.
However, I do think that, for sophomores, they might not be ready to appreciate that. So hopefully teaching Gatsby to sophomores is saying, hey, here's this phenomenal book full of people who are actually pretty abhorrent. But maybe later, maybe when you're, 59, you'll read it again and appreciate the language. Right now, let's just talk about, how terrible they are. I mean, BUHS has a very flexible curriculum, and there are very few required texts. So I supplemented, the sophomore curriculum, for instance, with the Laramie Project.
Yeah.
So that we had a lot of freedom to bring in things that weren't such old school kind of texts. And in AP, a lot of the books I chose I chose them because they were the most frequently asked about on the exam, because I wanted to have that sort of wide background to choose from. But I supplemented, with all kinds of crazy short stories and poems and other things. So they weren't just getting, and then of course I taught Beloved, which everybody should read.
You were at BUHS for almost 20 years. And how was it for you personally to be there? Did you have challenges? Did you have things about it that you feel supported?
I think that there were some things in the beginning that were pretty challenging, because I think that I arrived there not realizing that it was going to be problematic for me to be out as a teacher. And that fairly quickly became, a dilemma for the school and for me. And that was during the Take Back Vermont campaign and the civil union struggle. And so, it was sort of a confluence of my arrival and the larger political scene in Vermont. So there were some pretty grim days, but I think that, the school went through some growing pains, and so did I. And I think that, in the end, I felt very supported. In fact, I don't think I needed support, in the end, which was maybe more fun to say. And I also saw a change in the kids, the kids who were gay or questioning in their sort of comfort level. I just had an exchange with a former student, about that. And just, I'm so delighted to see any of the kids obviously out there in the world, being themselves, but particularly, for the kids who were really harassed, in their high school environment, to be so comfortable now, sort of in their own way, so.
Yes. Yeah. And high school can be a time of massive discomfort as well.
It's brutal.
I got to say, what's really interesting to me, and doing the show is when I often ask people about early influences, especially, or in general. So many people talk about teachers. Almost everybody, refers to a teacher, which is saying a lot about being a teacher and becoming one.
Well, you're stuck in a building with them for almost 8 hours a day. So it's a good thing that people find somebody there that, sort of speaks to them, I guess.
So you've been in Brattleboro in the community for as many years as you've been teaching. How do you like Brattleboro?
I love Brattleboro. I really do. I mean, I have to say, for the years that I was at the high school, that was my community. And I honestly didn't have a lot of time to do other things because it's a fairly overwhelming job. But, one of the things that I always really enjoyed was parent-teacher nights or parent conferences, because then, I got to thank the parents for having their kids who made my days, so challenging in a good way. And I think Brattleboro is pretty quirky and fun. I think that I've been at home now for a long, long time. So, I can't wait to go to Amy's, for instance, if Amy's is still existent.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
We're needing to rub elbows, right?
For what?
We're needing to rub elbows.
Yeah. And I would just go and sit in the front window of Amy's, and the stream of students who were home on vacation would come by and, do this and come in and talk. And it was always so much fun. So I look forward to that.
Yeah. And you retired in hopes that you would be doing your own writing and have the time for that.
Yep. Joke's on me. I did. And I applied in an MFA program and was accepted. So I'm doing both fiction and fiction this semester. Mm-hmm. And so, my son Leo said to me this morning, "Mama, I wish your writing would go faster."
That sentiment has been felt by writers and family members alike. Yeah,
me too. I mean, I think one day last week I wrote 2 paragraphs and I felt pretty good about it. So it's going, but it's very slow because there have been lots of other factors that have affected my slow.
Probably being enrolled in a program, though, I would think would help for structure.
Oh, for sure. There's a deadline. I have a deadline next Thursday, and I'm pretty anxious about it because I keep reading over the short story I've been working on. I'm like, I can't really tell anymore if this is good or really, really terrible. But I have to hand it in on Thursday. I feel like my students probably did.
Right. That's right.
And if it's a deadline, I'll hand it in no matter how.
Well, we look forward, Beneth, to hearing from you and maybe to see something published.
We'll see.
Yes, we will see. And it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Yeah, I'm really glad. I'm glad to have met you and spent some time with you. Thanks a lot.
Likewise.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone out there in the viewing land for coming to share some time on Here We Are with Beneth Goldschmidt-Sauer and myself, Wendy O'Connell. We will be back again next week, of course, with yet another person from the community coming on and talking about what they're doing. Stay safe, stay happy, stay engaged, and thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.